Lesson number 3, wet cyanotype. You can also go and check my website out. It's www.maverickbeyond.com. So this is me. I'm Jo Howell. I am a cyanotype artist who has worked with cyanotype for coming up to about 14 years now. I've decided to make this run of 10 lessons to introduce everybody to the wonderful art of cyanotype and to give you some ideas of the kind of things that you can achieve with, to be honest, not very much at all. Okay, if you want to find us on Instagram, I am at art_in_Sunderland. And if you want to find me on X, I'm at Maverick Art, all one word. How to make a wet cyanotype, lesson 3. The image that we've got on screen at the moment is actually just a vinegar test. I didn't mix in any other chemistries apart from a base level of the cyanotype solution that I'd already allowed to dry. And then I just did a very basic throwing of some household chemistries onto little sample sheets. What will I need? So the point of doing wet cyanotype is to basically experiment with lots of different textures to allow a little bit of serendipity to come into play, and also to add more painterly qualities to the medium itself. In this image, I have a wet cyanotype postcard that I did a few years ago, and in this image, I'm using a combination of different chemistries added on the top of the cyanotype. The chemistries that were used were soap bubbles, just general fairy liquid soap bubbles, some sumac, some salt, some lemon juice, and some water. And then also there's a little bit of leaching out of some of the flowers that I have, which were artificially dyed. So some of the red dye was coming out onto the page as well. Whilst it's called wet cyanotype, I really think that you're probably better off working with a dry, already prepared page of cyanotype. So, in other words, if you're working with some watercolour paper, put your cyanotype on, let it dry in the dark. I mean, if it's watercolour, it's going to dry quite quickly. You're probably only looking at about 10 minutes. And I think that you're better off doing it this way because you're guaranteed to get something back, and you don't have to allow the exposure times to run for ages and ages. You can cut down the exposure time by using cyanotype prepared pieces of paper. So this image on here is just with water and just different levels of dilution to the actual cyanotype on the paper. And then obviously I've done a very simple print of a feather. So things that you might want to collect ready to use. Vinegar, always great. I like using brown vinegar because it actually adds a little bit of colour in the brownness of it as well. But that's entirely up to you. Basically, you're looking for different types of acids to work with. So vinegar, lemon juice, vitamin C. The vitamin C that I'm using is water soluble, so it also has bicarb soda in it, which fizzes on top of the work, which is quite interesting. Turmeric, which you can activate with alcohol and turn into a photographic chemistry of its own accord. Soap bubbles, salt, red cabbage, herbs, spices, wine, and water spray. You can just go a little bit wild, but try to remember less is quite often more with cyanotype. Being careful about where you're putting stuff and just not over soaking everything. Otherwise, it might just become a little bit messy, to be honest. So I suggest using a sponge brush, as I'd said in previous lessons, to thinly apply your cyanotype solution to the surface of the paper and then just let it dry. So as you can see on the examples that we've got here, you can leave painterly marks in the first instance when you're painting it, so you can leave paint the edges, or you might want to do a full bleed, or you might want to weave it into something else. So there's a few things that you might want to do before you even start applying the additional chemistries. Some people make wet cyanotypes whilst the cyanotype solution is still wet on the paper. And that's fine. You just have to remember that you're going to need a much longer exposure. You're probably looking at 3 or 4 hours to allow all of that stuff to dry in. This example shows vinegar, which I just splashed on. I didn't add any water, just vinegar. And as you can see on this example, this is what the cyanotype starts to look like once I've applied all the different things on top. This is an example of mixing everything up. So on this one, we have different spices, which was like a mixed spice. So it smelled like cinnamon and things like that. A lot of the sky blue colouring has come from the lemon juice reacting. Browner colours have come from the brown vinegar that I've used, and that kind of orangey, bubbly looking areas is from the vitamin C and bicarb. What's nice again is to apply the different things to the surface and then allowing them to dry. It'll just keep more detail of the additions that you've put in. So you'll be able to keep those beautiful sharp edges. You'll have these fantastic splash marks, especially if you let it dry. I apply the different ingredients to the surface, and if I'm using powders like the vitamin C or the spices, then I'm using water to activate those. So this shows you vinegar dry before the exposure and then vinegar after the exposure. And I just used a simple oak leaf because the main interest in these samples was, of course, the interaction between the household chemistries and the cyanotype solution. This one was just vitamin C and water, and the bicarb obviously being mixed in with the vitamin C. What was quite interesting about this is that it really does start to bubble, so you do retain some of that bubble effect on top of the paper. And basically, the bicarb and the water have reacted and just fizzed on top of the cyanotype. Left hand side before I have done the exposure, and right hand side after the exposure. The exposure time for these, which was done underneath my UV lamp, in my usual box setup. So you're talking about 40 centimeters possibly from the paper underneath. And I have done the tests with all the different chemistries and then let it dry, then put on my leaves and examples that I wanted to make the images out of, and then I've exposed them for I think about 30 minutes to 40 minutes under my UV lamp. These were three of the lovely tests that I have managed to create. Water, just water, let it do its thing and then dry and then exposed it. Lemon was really nice because you can chop that lemon in half and you can actually use it as a stamp, retaining some of the shape of the fruit itself. Again, vinegar, I like the browns that were coming out of that. It actually worked really, really well with the blue. Water and salt. Salt's always used in dyeing different things, quite often as a resist. It works in two different ways. When it was mixed with the water, it acts as a salt water thinning process on the cyanotype. And if any of the grains of salt were left, then they act as a barrier for the light. Water and spices. So I just sprinkled on a little bit of this cinnamon and mixed spiced, and then I've just got some water by dipping my hand in and flicking it over the top. Then you can see on the end there water and the vitamin C. Sometimes it's nice to photograph these artworks as you're making them, because they're going to change. They're going to change a lot. Do excuse me, I'm just going to plug in my computer. So the textures and the colours that you achieve, that you can achieve at this point, will obviously totally change by the time you have exposed and then washed. So our next one, for the example in this image, I've used the shape of the lemon as a stamp and then applied the chemistry. Do forgive my spelling mistake there. Applied the chemistry in a circular design. Other fruits that might be nice to try are lime, forest berries, and things like that. I haven't done that yet, but I will. Mixing it up. Sometimes it's nice just to go a little bit wild and put all of it on and just see how it all begins to interact with each other. You can gain some amazing effects by just experimenting with simple household products. So what was interesting with the spices and water is the cinnamon, which was quite a orangey kind of color, released some of the orange into the print. So I thought that was quite nice. The actual granules of the spices themselves washed away, but they also had done similar to the salt and left a little bit of like dust sprinkling that interacted with the light. Very simple. Again, salt and water, so you can see how it's affecting your image. And if you don't expose certain areas, then vast majority of the time that'll just wash away, and you'll be left with all of this mad texture in the background. Textures like soap bubbles are best exposed while there are still bubbles on the paper. And this is the only one that I leave wet and then put into the exposure unit. So, for example, I might have added all of my spices, water, vinegar, all the rest of it, let that dry. Then fill a washing up sink with, or a bowl with some soap suds, and then literally just pick them up and chuck them on. When you expose through the bubbles, you do get these really, really interesting shapes that are left over. This example is also done underneath glass. So I've put the bubbles on and all the wet stuff, and then I've just put my piece of glass directly on top. And that's what has allowed us to keep the detail within the petals of the flower. You can see every vein. It's absolutely beautiful. These are obviously is just a quick photograph showing how I've set up my samples. Why would you be bothered? Well, wet cyanotype is really great for adding texture to the work. I love it personally because I come from a fine art background. So I'm interested in not just the photographic qualities of cyanotype, but also the painterly qualities of cyanotype. And obviously, who doesn't like to pretend they're a wizard while they're throwing like bits of chemistry around? You can't really overexpose a cyanotype if you're using solid objects to block everything off. So just leave it as long as you want. If you've still got wet items like soap bubbles, then yeah, you want to leave it a minimum of 45 minutes. You're not going to overcook it. If anything, you'll undercook it and you won't have what you envisaged. The image on the left hand side is actually done on a very fine washi paper, and if you're using thinner papers, then definitely let them dry before you're doing your exposure, because you need to be minimizing the handling of the paper when it's wet. If you're using negatives or acetate, let those chemistries dry before you put it under the exposure. That way, when you put your negative on top of your page, you're not going to ruin the neg. And by neg, I mean an acetate negative, probably not a real negative, because the length of time that you're going to be exposing this for, it is far too long for a celluloid negative to survive. So when you're working, best to have plans, cutouts, stencils to work with at hand when you're ready to go. All right, thank you for sticking with us to the end.
It's okay, I'll spend the day with you. It's okay, I'll learn to play with you. Take the time, it's sublime.